Welcome to Confessions of an Entrepreneur, powered by RG. My name is Carl Swansbury, and I'm thrilled today to welcome Steve Rawlingson onto my podcast. Steve is an entrepreneur, someone who has always had ADHD and is proud to admit that, because his absolute focus in wanting to continually achieve is, in his own mind for sure, perhaps the one thing that has resulted in his success. Steve, at an early years, certainly wasn't destined to great things, having left school without any GCSEs and really unsure as to where to lay his foundations. But since then, Steve has gone on to scale up an international energy and renewable staffing business, which 4 years ago secured investment from Gresham House Ventures. I'm really looking forward to understanding a bit more about Steve's why, how you perhaps go on to achieve greatness when you've had perhaps limited opportunity at a young age to academically succeed, to understand how he perhaps goes about getting people to support him as he scales his business, and of course to understand some of the challenges that Steve's had to overcome as he's gone about scaling his business over recent years, what with, of course, the difficult macroeconomic environment. I do think that today will be insightful, inspiring, and without doubt, a podcast not to be missed by anybody who themselves is scaling up their business. Steve, it's absolutely awesome to have you on our Confessions of an Entrepreneur's podcast today. Massive thanks for joining me, Steve.
Cheers for the invite.
Absolute pleasure. And of course, I've known of you and indeed the business that you founded and of course have since built over the last 12 years for a very long time.
Yeah.
But just to get our conversation started, for any viewer tuning into this podcast who might not have met you, what's the one thing that you've achieved in your career so far that you would want them to be most aware of?
Good question. I would have said founding Samuel Knight, but I recently graduated about 2 weeks ago with a master's. And hand on heart, I would say that's probably one of the most inspiring things for me that I've done, because I left school with no GCSEs. I knew I was academic, but to get later on in life and actually grit and teeth do an extra 13 hours a week in education for myself, self-develop myself and do a master's, not a degree, whilst being a full-time single dad and growing a business and internationalizing it, that was probably one of the difficulties things I've ever done. So I know that sounds weird as an entrepreneur, but definitely graduating with my master's. Everybody who is close to me knew how important that was to me. And again, there was times when I was close to just going, this is just too hard.
Yeah.
Like to try and graduate whilst running a company is really difficult. And there was times where I questioned myself and I thought, have I actually got the intellectual intelligence to do a master's and then to walk up on that stage and get a master's in business psychology and management? That was like, well done, Steve. That was a moment for me.
Massive,
huge moment. Just a huge moment.
And let me ask, and we will probably come back to this later in the podcast, Steve, but let me ask, what was the one thing that inspired you at this stage in your career to do a master's? Because of course, as you say, you'd already set up the business.
Yeah.
The business was already highly profitable. You'd already secured investment from Gresham House Ventures. So why do you need a master's?
Do you know what? It was always just to prove to myself that, a lot of things when I was growing up made me question, have I got the norm in terms of going to school, doing well, and then going to college, going university, and doing things the right way round? And I guess it was just to prove to myself that the teachers were wrong, and I could have gone to uni and I could have got a degree. I like proving people wrong. So what inspired me? I love self-developing.
Yep.
I personally think that the moment you stop learning is the moment that you go backwards. I'm always reading. I'm always self-developing in some way, shape or form. And I thought to myself, what's the hardest thing that I can put myself through to prove that I have the ability to push and scale this business? And I've always had an interest in psychology as well. Obviously, I work in a people organization. I don't sell products. I sell a service, and that service is heavily focused around people. And that when you're dealing with somebody, you've got to understand I've always thought you've got to understand their whys, their hows, and their wants and their whys. And business psychology really kind of always stood out to me. So one, it was an interest. Two, I love self-developing. Three, I wanted to prove myself and the teachers that I could do something like this. So yeah, that was it. That was the inspiration.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. It was very tough.
For obtaining your master's.
And I literally got my master's, and then one of the professors came over and he went, DBA next, Steve? And I was just like, mate, I need some time off, man.
That's right. There's continual self-development and insanity, and you do have to be careful. The two are closely linked.
But yeah, I think even the board of Sam Unite were like, you're going to end up going and doing a PhD or a DBA, aren't you? And I was just like, I just need maybe 2 or 3 years time. I'm getting a bit older now. So maybe when I'm like, I don't know, 45, 48, maybe I'll look at it. But for the minute, I'm just going to carry on reading now. That's it. Yes. No more further education.
And of course, you mentioned that one of the things that inspired you to do a master's was to prove the teachers wrong. So that probably is a question that I can ask, which allows us to go right back to your early years, Steve. So obviously, you mentioned that you didn't go to university.
No.
So can you just tell me a little bit about what you achieved at school and what it was the teachers were saying to you? Because, of course, it seems that's been a motivation for you since.
I didn't achieve anything at school. I was diagnosed with ADHD. I look at it as a bit of a superpower. I think as I've got older, that superpower has calmed down. I'm not as crazy now. And the more you read into ADHD and behavioral problems, it's just a high sense of energy where you can concentrate on loads and loads of things, but can't really go deep and wide into one thing.
Yes.
So I was a bit of let's just say a naughty boy, bunking off school and hanging around with the wrong people, as you do.
And where did that sort of naughtiness come from? I.e.,
boredom. Our typical 1980s family. Dad was a bus driver, mum was a stay-at-home mum, 3 brothers, and I was the middle one. And I kind of just got left to my own devices. And when you're a bit of a high energy person, you've got a child, you have to create structural discipline around him. And I've very much got structure and discipline in my life now. Yep. And I have for a long time, but probably as a child, I didn't really have structure or discipline around me. So I was left to my own devices as the middle child.
Okay.
So out of boredom, went out and, typical teenage things, going out and getting chases and jumping over edges and, bunking off school and just being an idiot, basically.
Yes.
Nothing really bad, but, my mum and dad probably just didn't know how to deal with me at that time. Teachers didn't really know how to educate me, let's say. I think modern day now, it's easier to teach people who have got high levels of energy, let's say. But in the, early 90s, I don't think they really knew what ADHD was, or these individuals that have got high levels of energy that just get bored really, really quickly.
Were you actually diagnosed with ADHD?
I was, yeah. So but I don't really think they knew what it was, my mum and dad. They didn't call it, what did they call it? They called it something like high deficit behavioral issues or something like that. But yeah, at 13, had like people around me going, I don't understand why you're such a naughty little boy. And yeah, the teachers just turned around to me. I was 15 and they expelled me for bunking off, being a bit of an idiot and not paying attention in class, being destructive. Basically being the class clown, if I'm honest.
So does that mean you left school with sort of
nothing?
GCSEs or that perhaps?
Well, let's say the way that is, no GCSEs. Okay. I was 15 years old in Stoke-on-Trent and expelled with no GCSEs, and I had to basically crack on and say, right, this, I've not got an education now, but I've always had a high level of work ethic. So I had my first job at 11. Times were different then. I had 2 paper rounds. I worked on a Sunday market with one of my friends and car washing. And, I had this undying, love for money. which was strange because as you get older and you understand psychology, and if you look back and you understand people who have like this addiction to money, they usually say it's because they're missing something out of their life, and they want to fill that void with something, usually love. But, I think my mum and dad did love me, but I had this, I had this addiction to money. I just wanted money, but I would never spend it. I just wanted to earn it.
Where do you think that did come from then? Because, of course, you mentioned that
really good question.
Didn't work. Your dad was a bus driver, so you weren't surrounded by abundance.
I don't know. I looked into
you think did inspire you to create wealth?
Well, there's that question, isn't it? Are entrepreneurs born or are they made?
Exactly.
And a part of me has to think that they are born. You have something in you that you can't describe. You don't really know how to put it into words, but you just feel this ability to deal with adversity, deal with challenges, push yourself, never stop believing in yourself, and the desire in that kind of work ethic. You know that if you work really, really hard and you give it everything that you've got, the chances are you will become successful at whatever you put your focus in. So even when I got expelled, as you can imagine, my dad was pretty cross with me. And my granddad, Samuel, was pretty annoyed with me as well. And he was a big part of my life. And I just turned around and I was like, look, it's fine. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to work hard. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to work hard and I'll push myself and I will be successful. And I didn't really know what that looked like. I didn't really have a plan, but I knew in my gut that I was going to be okay. And I was.
So what came next? So obviously, as you say, you were doing all of these jobs.
Yeah.
You'd left school with no GCSEs. So how did you manage to tunnel, perhaps what for many might have been a pretty depressing set of circumstances positively?
I got a job working with a company that did office furniture fit outs. Oh. I went to the interview in my dad's shirt, bright yellow shirt with my dad's tie. Went there and said, I was really honest with this guy called Glenn. I said, I've been expelled from school, got new GCSEs, but I want a job. And I knew they were hiring. And he said, sat down, interviewed me, and he said, do you know what? I like you, mate. You can have a job. So 3 weeks after I got expelled, I turned 16. So all my friends were getting their GCSE results, thinking about A-levels and whatnot. And I just got my first job in Chase Office Furniture. And within 4 weeks, I picked up my first wage with £160 because I'd done a bit of overtime. And I thought, right, this is feeding that addiction now. And then I stayed there for about a year and got to travel around, which gave me a bit of an insight into like traveling and being on my own. Yes. So, and just looking after myself. I didn't have any any responsibilities or anything. So the company had the contract for Easy Internet Cats. I don't know if you remember it.
I do indeed.
And because I was the youngest, didn't have any family or anything like that, they literally just turned around to me and said, oh, do you want to go and work in this country, this country, this country, and to do the internet fit outs, the Easy Internet fit outs? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. So put me on a plane. I got overtime rates, working away rates, and got to work with these much older lads from Bolton in Barcelona, Amsterdam, Madrid, and Paris. And when I came back, I thought, I don't want to be in the UK. I want to leave. And I asked my dad if I could join the army. I'm about 17 at this point. And I thought, I want to be a paratrooper. And I asked my dad if he would sign me into the army. And he said, no, I'm not being responsible for signing your death warrant because you don't do as you're told. So I thought, damn, I need to leave Stoke. I don't really want to be here. And just as fate happens, I saw an advert in the paper saying live and work in Ibiza selling holiday homes. And so I got on a plane and moved to Ibiza. I had the interview on the Wednesday, and by the Saturday I was in Ibiza.
Wow. And before we talk about your time in Ibiza, what was it you had seen in that 12 months before that led you to conclude that you wanted to live, work overseas?
I think growing up as the middle child, I wouldn't change anything to do with my child.
Sure.
Okay, not a thing. I had the best upbringing that my dad and my mum is children of the 80s being brought up in the 90s could give me. So, but I've always had this sense of just taking care of myself. My brothers, I would see my brothers do things with my mum and dad, and they would go in their bedrooms in the morning and have morning cuddles, and I would be in my bed and just go, I don't wonder, I'm more comfortable in my bed. And if there was family events, I would try and just go and see my friends or something like that. So I've always had this sense that it was just me, and I wanted to just be me. And I think when I got to have that experience of working abroad, doing these easy internet cafes, I thought, it's everything's on me then. So if it fails because of me and no one else. And honestly, I just really didn't want to live in Stoke. Nothing wrong with Stoke-on-Trent, and I'm sure you'll have listeners. I know there's a couple of Stoke lads who live in the northeast who have done well for themselves.
Yes,
there's not much going on there. Yeah, the jobs aren't great. The pay isn't great. It's an industrial area of the United Kingdom. It's just not. It just wasn't for me. It didn't fit. People in Stoke, I believe, they just exist. They go work, they come home, they have their 2 holidays a year. And again, that's fine for people who want that.
Yes.
But that wasn't me. I didn't want just that. I didn't want to exist. I wanted to go and push myself and experience new things. So, I just thought, why not? Just move to Ibiza.
And as you say, you now work in a people services business. Yep. And we'll talk a lot about that later in the podcast, Steve. But just help me understand a bit more about what you said when it comes to being someone as a young child who always liked independence, felt very at ease alone, perhaps didn't want to be around people. Given that, of course,
it's now family, not people.
Well, just your family. There you are. You can't pick your family, right?
No.
And all of that. But let's just discuss that for a second, because, of course, now in business, you probably agree that your business is successful as a consequence of collaborating with others.
Exactly.
And no one ever achieved greatness alone. So why do you think, as a sort of 15, 16, 17-year-old, actually, your view was, I'd rather do everything alone, because if I do it myself, I've only got myself to thank.
Yep.
Where did that come from? That sort of single-minded mentality, do you think?
Again, I think as you're younger, you either love, it's really difficult to put into words. How do I explain this? Maybe just focusing when it's only you and you don't have to worry about anybody else. You can do and come and go as you please.
Yes.
And I probably had that mentality until my son was born.
Right.
Because I had no responsibilities.
Yes.
And I looked at my friends' families, my brothers, my family, and I thought, no, I don't want this. I want something more.
Okay.
And I knew if I was surrounded by these people that were living like this, I would be that person as well.
Yes.
And I didn't want that.
Okay. It's interesting you knew that perhaps subconsciously that early in your
It was definitely subconscious. It wasn't consciously.
Yes.
But then as soon as you start having children and you have responsibilities, then that does change. But probably it changed in my family, in my family, but it didn't change in my work.
Yes.
Until probably founding Samuel Knight, when it was me and, in my early career and being in business to business sales, let's say, again, I wasn't, and I'm sure, my old managing director, Andy, we still talk all the time now, and he was like, you were like a machine, Steve. You literally just had tunnel vision. You didn't get distracted with all these small things that get on in business, bitching and, such and such is having this or all these things that distract people. He was like, you had tunnel vision and you just worked really, really hard. And I wasn't probably the best team player. I really wasn't. I was focused on myself. I pushed myself as hard as I could and I worked really hard. And for that, I got amazing results. And them amazing results allowed me to create some wealth for myself at a very young age. In my mid-20s, earning significant amount of money, owning houses and going on nice holidays. The things that you think are important are done. But then things change and then you start getting your kick from seeing other people do really well. And I think we said this before the podcast started. You mature in life, you mature in business as you get older, and different things give you your motivation. So that didn't change being, selfish, let's say. It changed in my family when I had my son. but it didn't change in business until my, let's call it, hierarchical needs needed change. It's like Maslow's and Hertzberg.
That's right.
They're true. They are actually true. When your needs change and your motivations change, the world around you changes as well, and your view and what makes you, let's say, happy changes as well, because you want to see, like, my biggest drive now is seeing the people in Samuel Knight doing really, really well. Like, employing somebody who, doesn't own a house, is living in rented accommodation, maybe driving a 15-year-old car, and then within 2 years, he's putting his deposit down on his first house, he's buying a nice car, and he's starting a family. For me, Samuel Knight has played a part in that success, and that's a really big drive for me. And all the staff know that as well. And yeah, your motivations just change.
I mean, you've said a lot in there, Steve. What's most fascinating is the fact that you acknowledge, and it's something that I suspect many viewers will also be able to acknowledge, that as you, as an individual and as an entrepreneur, grow, actually, not only do you have more experience and hindsight to draw down upon, not only do your needs evolve, because once you've got £1 million in the bank, then quite frankly, if you have 2, 3, 4, 5, arguably, it still gives you the same thing, which is financial independence in relative terms. So it then becomes actually more about enjoyment, satisfaction, spending time with like-minded individuals, all of the things you've just touched on. I think the one thing, though, that's really fascinating is how you viewed your sort of early years, because you used the word selfish.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that's quite a negative word. But actually, I don't think you were selfish. I think that you were very focused.
Yeah.
Which is arguably a much more positive perspective on the same.
Yeah, the wording definitely focused.
Yes.
But if you are just focused on yourself, I guess as a mature man now, you look back at that and go, okay, I didn't get distracted. Just like in my career when my first managing director said, you just had tunnel vision. You just worked really, really hard, harder than anybody else in that business, because I achieved great results because I was so focused. Yep. You're probably right. Looking back in my younger days, it wasn't that. I just didn't get distracted by all the noise, the negativity. There was a lot of negativity there.
Well, there you are.
And I'm glasses half full with me. I love being alive. I love life. I love everything about it. I think it's one of the greatest gifts that we've got. So positivity for me is really important.
I agree. And of course, you also talked about early in your life, making sure that you were surrounded by people who inspired you, people who you wanted to emulate, perhaps learn off.
Yep.
And actually, again, I think as a young person, that's actually an incredibly astute thing to have done, because you become the people you spend your time with.
Totally.
And I suspect you were looking around you thinking, I don't want to be like these people.
Yeah. I mean, again, are we born? Are entrepreneurs born, or are we made? And I definitely wasn't the norm. I was the black sheep of the whole family, and I'm sure my family would say that now. I help them and I give back to them now, but I was definitely the black sheep. So that for me has to tell me that, I was born this way, and something was in me, that drive, that ambition, that willingness to push myself harder than anybody else, because we were all dealt the same cards in my family, and I'm the only one who is sitting here getting interviewed by Carl Swansbury, so there you are. I must have been doing this.
It's interesting, because of course we all want to succeed in our own way.
Yeah. I agree.
We all want to do well for ourselves, our families, and we all want to make our parents proud. So I think everyone perhaps has those things in common. But I think the thing that differentiates greatness from good is a willingness to be the black sheep. Because actually, if you aren't the black sheep, then all you are is like every other sheep. And quite frankly, that's just the population. And of course, success and achieving significant success means you will be in the minority, and almost should be.
Yeah.
So I've always been quite comfortable with the concept of being the black sheep, because that's exactly what I strive to be.
I totally agree with you.
Even though many people perhaps see that negatively. Okay, so you mentioned that, of course, you decided to go to Ibiza.
Yeah. There was much business. There was much business.
It was nothing to do with, Café Del Mar. It was nothing to do with the beautiful women. It was all about selling property, right? That was the single reason.
I mean, I didn't go. That didn't go to plan, because it wasn't very good. So I just ended up staying in Ibiza and selling club tickets. I set up a company. I think it was called Loco Ibiza, and we were one of us, and I think it was about 3 or 4 of us that set it up, and we were one of the few people that actually went to the nightclubs, bought the tickets, and then sold them on the streets. I've been back 98.
Awesome. How was it?
It was amazing. You know, what did I learn from that? How to have fun, how to enjoy life, and you know, it was an amazing experience. And I think that's important. I was still focused. I was earning good money. You know, I was making profits on the club tickets. It's just, you know, leaving somewhere and just being on your own, having, you know, good friends around you and making amazing memories. And obviously met Sarah and had my son and my daughter. You know, everything plays a part in who I am today.
Right.
And every page and every chapter has got me to where I am today. So it was amazing. What I learned was independence, real independence.
That's right.
Because I was living, you know, in another country, hundreds of miles away from my family, having fun. And, you know, I look back on some of them memories in Ibiza for them 4 seasons and think, yeah, it was amazing. It was good fun.
And did you stay in Ibiza over the winters as well? Or was it
No, we travelled around. So we travelled Asia one year.
Wow.
So
the two of you or with friends?
sometimes just the two of us. And then myself, I didn't meet Sarah until I'd been out there for maybe 2 seasons. So summers in Ibiza, winters either Canaries, mainland Spain, the Tenerife, a little bit in Tenerife, a little bit in Asia, and then back to Ibiza. But,
Wow,
yeah,
awesome.
traveling around, great fun.
And did you manage to flush out some of the naughtiness, Steve, that you'd carried for many years prior to?
No,
you had our son.
I did have fun, yeah, Cole, I did. Did I flush out naughtiness? Yeah, I did, yeah. I think,
Good.
I think when you have a child, because I had Joel at 21.
Was that planned?
No, I was 21.
For that save, I would never want to assume and be right.
Definitely not. I mean, we'd only been dating for 6 months, and then obviously, you know, these things happen.
And can I ask, given everything you've said about, to that point, being very focused, wanting to be free, not to be tied down. Of course, your then late partner, Sarah, finds out she's pregnant.
Yeah.
A surprise.
Yeah.
What led you both to conclude that actually this is what you wanted, even though it wasn't planned?
Sarah took the lead on it. And, you know, I respected her decision. I was obviously quite worried. I was 20 years old and about to become a dad, and I could barely look after myself, never mind look after a child. But when you're in them circumstances, you just evolve into this, you know, being a good dad and, you know, and doing well by your family. So Joel was born August the 2nd. He's 21 on Saturday.
Wow.
Big day for him. And 21. But at the time, yeah, I said to him at the weekend, I was like, you're actually the same age now as when I was having you. And he was just like, that's my dad. So mad.
And you were worried, of course.
Yeah, I mean, look, it wasn't planned, but I wouldn't change nothing. It's when you're here now and where you were 21 years ago, I wouldn't change nothing. But at the time, I was probably sitting thinking, oh my God, this is like mad. I'm 21, I'm going to be a dad. But what Joel really did for me was he controlled that kind of high energy, that drive to be more focused on, I've got to work really, really hard now, because we came back to the UK, to Newcastle. We didn't want to go Stoke. So me and Sarah came to Newcastle.
And why Newcastle?
So that's where she's from.
Okay.
So that's how I ended up here. And I knew that as soon as I got here, I had no GCSEs. I didn't have a degree. I was 21. I'd been living abroad for 4 years, pissing around, let's say, and acting the go and having fun and earning money at the same time. And I had to convince an employee to take me on and give me a job. And that is how I fell into recruitment. I went for an interview and the guy gave me an opportunity, changed my life. His name was Andy Hardacre. And he was the chap who was my first MD. And I made sure that every morning, if the start time was 8 o'clock, it was a merchant house in the big market. start time was 8 o'clock, finishing time was 6, and I would be in that office at 6:30 every morning, making sure people could see that I was there. I was the first one in every morning, last one out the door, and I just gave it everything. And now looking back on it, at the time, I think people just thought, he's just glorified. He's just, he's just trying to impress management and that. I wasn't. I had nothing to fall back on. I had to make this work. I didn't have a fallback plan. There was no, if this plan doesn't work, what's in plan B? There was no plan B. Plan A had to work.
Yes.
And that's what I did. I gave it everything. And because I had Joel, and there's no bigger why than your children.
That's right.
You can talk about whatever motivates you and whatever your aspirations are, but my why was Joel.
That's right.
And I just gave it 110%. Oh. And Joel changed my life. He really did. He's my best friend. And he changed my life, literally. If it wasn't for him, would I have come back to the UK when I did? Probably not. And then that kind of work mentality and that drive, I've seen it with friends who are still abroad now. It gets further and further and further away because the interview question when you come back at say 30, if you've been away for nearly 10 years, what have you been doing? Well, I've been living in Ibiza and traveling all over the world and, having fun and making friends and making memories. Okay, mate. Well, you probably should have come back a few years before that.
That's right. That's right.
If a career was really important to you. So at the time, yes, it was nerve-wracking having a son at 21, but wouldn't have changed it. He literally allowed me to push myself to who I am today. And them 7 years that I spent at ATA Selection, they literally gave me the foundations to, 1, be successful, 2, invest in me in terms of allowing me to maybe close out some of my the gaps from not being focused on education as a young child. So they invested heavily in me. They changed my mindset and reprogrammed that energy, that high energy that I had, to focus more on a goal and align that goal with a purpose. And they allowed me to, create a good life for me and my family. And I earned really good money there.
And of course, you mentioned your son, but closely followed was your daughter.
4 years later, yeah.
Again, presumably not a plan. As a theme, Steve.
No, it wasn't. But you know what? At the time, me and Sarah were both like, wow, we did okay with Joel.
Yeah, exactly.
And we'll be okay this time. And yeah, Lily was born and she is now 16, going on 26. I mean, she's a very independent, educated young lady, very driven, very focused. And that was it. It was just Lily and Joel. And again, what more why do you want from that? It's an amazing feeling being a dad.
It is, isn't it? It's the best achievement I think anyone can ever point to in their life. And actually, as you say, the need to succeed remains, but your motivation changes. You're not doing it for perhaps some of the selfish reasons you pointed to earlier, Steve, but actually you're doing it because you've got people who are dependent on you being successful, which is a different motivation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So of course, at that point, you were an employee at ATA Selection. You and your partner, had welcomed your daughter into the world. So had 2 beautiful children, 5-6 years apart, but nonetheless still young kids at the time. What happened next? Because I know that obviously you guys were dealt a really unfair blow. I mean, family.
Yeah, I moved to London. I thought I was ready to set up on my own. I was 27. And I reached out to a couple of people that I'd met in business. And one of them was Paul Beak, who we both know, great guy. And I met him and he really inspired me, and he said, look, don't take this the wrong way, Steve. He was like, you're 27, I think it was 27 at the time, you're 27. You know how to generate business, but you don't know how to run a company. And I think you may be a little bit too young to go out and do this. I hadn't had exposure to managing P&Ls. My role at ATA at the point of me leaving was very driven on business development. So I didn't manage teams, I didn't manage P&Ls, I didn't understand balance sheets, finance, or anything that's really important with growing a business. And I know there's entrepreneurs out there that go, oh, you know what? Well, everything starts with business development. But when I met Paul, he turned around and said, look, why don't you come and work with me for a few years and I'll teach you everything that I know. And then if you still want to go off and set up on your own, fine. So I moved to London, and then not at the time, me and Sarah ended up going separate ways and splitting up. But we both co-parented, Joel and Lily. So I came back at weekends, co-parented, and then came back to Newcastle after about 3 years in London. Unfortunately, Sarah fell poorly, and my focus was I need to be here with my children and help them. And she passed away sadly. But Joel and Lily were both, they had a lot of love around them. They've got amazing grandparents, and a really nice, tight family. And, they've got me there, and they knew that everything was going to be okay. And that's what we did. We just got through it. And with the help of, friends, family, and their friends and their family, safe to say, their ability to deal with adversity now is, and I see them smiling and I see them enjoying themselves and progressing in life. Like Joel, 21 this Saturday, just about passed his driving test. I know he should have passed it a long time ago, which I beast him about all the time, but he's just about passed his driving test, and he's been at Samuel Knight now for 5 years, and he's elevating at Samuel Knight, and he did well in his GCSEs after we put him through his apprenticeship. And see my daughter, who's just finished her GCSEs, and she's going on to do politics, economics, and sociology.
Wow, good on
in sixth form, and hearing her drive and ambition for her life, I just think, wow, your mum would be so proud of you. And they're two great kids. They just deal. I think because they've got me as the dad, and what I say is, look, you can focus on all the things that make you sad. And you can focus on all the things that you think are unfair. Or you can focus on all the nice things that happened. You can focus on all the nice memories that you've had, and how, whatever you do in your life, if there is anything after this great gift that we've been given, your mum will be looking down on you. She will be proud of you. And, it'll be an amazing, you just push yourself and focus, try and turn your energy from all this sadness to actually think about how great life actually is. And yes, you've had adversity, but that's life. It is what it is. And I think they see that.
I mean, that's really inspiring, Steve, because it is all about perspective. And of course, whilst what happened to Sarah is devastating, unfair, unjust, not what anyone wanted, life has a habit of dealing you often shit cards. And actually the difference between someone who can look back positively and look back with frustration and continual angst is the person who chooses their mindset. And that's the only thing that differentiates. So I think that the advice that you've given the kids, and of course, in turn, their choice to look forward, not backward, is so inspiring.
It is. And the grandparents and my partner, Amy, she's an amazing, she's amazing with my daughter. And I look at Joel, and he's settled down with his girlfriend who he's been with since he was 14. He's got his own house. He's got his 2 dogs. He's just about past his test. I mean, he lives literally he lives like me, he's not a party animal. He doesn't go out, and he doesn't drink that much. And he's just got he's built this lovely life for himself. And then I look at Lily and how she is with Amy, and how she is with Amy's family, and, her friends. And I think there's a lot of things that play a part in them being able to deal with adversity. And their nan is Sarah's mum is amazing as well, with both Lily and Joel. And it's brought the family even closer together. And like you say, it's just a different view. It's a different perspective, isn't it?
Of course it is. We can't control what happens to us, but we can choose our mindset. Full stop. And let me ask, obviously a devastating time, and I can't pretend to understand how you and the 2 kids and Sarah's family and friends, felt at that time. Obviously you'd spent 3 years in London.
Yep.
away, and of course you broke up.
Yep.
When you look back at that time, is there anything that, on reflection, perhaps you wish you had approached differently?
Probably not. No, because the way that the story, let's say, the chapter played out was that it gave me the ability to go off and maybe realign my focus and my kind of view on life, maybe a bit different, because I was heavily focused on my career. I was still a good dad, we were still co-parenting the best you could with me being down in London, but maybe I just focused a bit too much on my career, because you get sucked into, when it's your career, you don't mean it to, but it just pulls you in, and you do lose sight a little bit. And I know some business people that are still with their partners. They shouldn't be with their partners. And
so, what do you mean they shouldn't be with their partners?
They haven't got a good relationship,
right?
So they're with their partners. They've got, they don't have a great relationship. They probably try and spend as much time away from that household as they possibly can, because they're in this kind of like negative energy in this household where they don't really want to be there. And what I did is I moved to London, and the kids got the very best of me. I co-parented the best I could. Me and Sarah had totally gone off, her life that way, my life that way. But I probably spent more quality time with my children than I did with some of my friends who were in full-time relationships with their partners and their children. But the kids got the best of me.
Totally.
So no, is there anything that I would have done differently? No, not at all. I mean, I am where I am.
A point you've made there, Steve, really interesting. So, like you, I literally have so many different pulls on my time, but the one thing I absolutely love is my business.
Yeah.
And often my friends who've got family and children will say, Carl, you mustn't see your daughter enough.
Uh-huh.
And it's a loaded statement, because what they're effectively saying is you're a bad dad.
Yeah.
Because I spend more time with my children than you. And of course, that's their perspective, and they are entitled to it. But of course, my contentment comes from knowing that, I don't spend 6 hours every single evening with my daughter sat on the couch watching TV. I don't do that. But I tell you what, when she's with me, she knows all the time, and she gets more from me than I suspect most of my friends' children get from them, but in a much more concentrated period of time. So as you say, it's not about the amount of time you spend with your children, it's the quality of time.
100%. And if it just realigns everything, doesn't it? That everything, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. And, there's nothing that anyone could say to me now that they wouldn't turn around and say, Steve is an amazing dad. Yep. Joel and Lily, the proudest moment for me, or the greatest thing that I love is, I don't want presents off the kids for birthdays or Christmas. And it's like, it must be a competition between them. So who can write the most caring, nicest, thoughtful things in a card, because they just get me and they hit me in the heart. And I'm like, oh man. And it's like, oh, dad's crying upstairs, because it just means so much to you that your kids, the best thing that I know when I'm an old man is that my kids will turn around, Joel and Lily will turn around and say, me dad was my hero. Fact, without a doubt. And I think that's a great thing to have. So, I'm happy with where my life is, what journey I've been on, and who knows what that journey looks like for the next 30, 40 years. But I'm happy with everything that happened and where we are.
Thanks, Steve, for that insight. So obviously you were at ATA,
yes,
as an employee.
Yeah.
And of course we talked a little bit about Paul and your time with Paul. So tell me, what was it that happened that gave you the inspiration or the confidence or the kick up the backside, or all of the aforementioned things that you needed to set up Samuel Knight? When was it that you decided now is the time?
I moved from ATA to London, and then from London, I came back to Newcastle, and I got a director's job with Michael Page.
Oh.
And when I went in there, within a year was, I got all the awards that you can imagine in Michael Page. I was a big biller. I built a small team, and I'm trying to think of the award that they gave me. I think the award was like the best newcomer in all of Michael Page and the fastest growing division of Michael Page history, which I was pretty like, wow, this is amazing. Being recognized for hard work. And there was a project that was coming off with a client of mine. And I pitched Michael Page about this client and said, look, he needs, I think it was something ridiculous, like 150 overhead linesmen working on telegraph poles, on wood poles. Basically, that comes into your the electricity comes into your house before cables. This was going back 12 years and 11 years. And the board's view was that it was too risky. It was a risk to the business to bring these people in. And I was like, well, it's not contract work, it's permanent work. I don't understand what the risk is. And obviously, I don't like being told what to do. And they turned around and they said, well, you can't do it. And I was just like, what? And then at Michael Page, it was a great company to be a part of. And I can see why people work there. But it was very focused around, my mindset was changing a little bit where I was becoming, because I'd taken on a little team. It was about 4 or 5 of us that worked to my team. And that's when my drive and my motivation was changing a little bit. Unconsciously, I became more focused on my team rather than me. I think that happens in life anyway, as you get older, especially in business.
And why do you think it does? Because a lot of people, Steve, often observe exactly that, but why do you think that subconsciously happens? So you
progress.
Form through people rather than yourself?
I think it's you progress, and you hit a level of, you hit a level of progression where you're earning good money. You've got all the nice things, you've got the house, you've got the car, you're doing well for yourself, and let's say you're in a position of, say, belonging or maybe like self-actualization. You're starting to look at P&Ls and take ownership of this team, and they rely on you. And that was my drive, was that I wanted this team to do really well. And then when Michael Page board turned around and said, look, we don't want to do this work, I remember sitting there and starting getting a little bit frustrated. And they were heavily focused on, my biggest competition in Michael Page was Michael Page. So I was brought in to set up a new division, Michael Page Energy, under a really inspiring guy called Dean Ball. Dean left, and then because their business model was very horizontal, and what they wanted to do, this chap called Dean Ball, is he could see that professional staffing was changing. And he said, look, what we want to probably try and do is create vertical businesses within Michael Page. And I was like, great idea, which is how I ended up there. Because I've always been a vertical specialist. So always focused on renewable energy. And that's all I've done for 24 years now. And I thought, yep, great, great idea. I'll come in. And then after about 9 months, say 10 months, I would see my P&L and it would change. Like my revenue, they would say, oh, that was engineering work, so a percentage of that needs to go in Michael Page Engineering. Or that was a sales role in renewable energy, so a percentage of that needs to go into sales. And I just started thinking, wow, I've got enough competition out in the world that now I'm actually competing with people, with other businesses in Michael Page. So it kind of deflated me a little bit. And then I got these awards, and, it wasn't, when you've worked with somebody like Paul Beak, when you've gone corporate, so this was my career, working ATA, AMI listed business, very corporate, dark suit, white shirt, old school mentality, can't even have a beard, right? Me and you wouldn't be working there now. And I like structure and discipline. Before I said this, the start of the podcast, I think it's important to have structure and discipline in all walks of life, because that means that you know where you're going.
Yes.
And you know what you need to do to get there. It's like saying, you wouldn't get on a plane without knowing where you were going on that plane. You want to know the route that you're going. And that's how my mind works. So I need structure, I need discipline, and I need a plan. And I didn't really get that in Michael Page, and I didn't really know where it was going. But when you've worked at somewhere like ATA, corporate, and then you've gone and worked with an entrepreneur, with someone as inspiring as Paul Beak, and then leave London, which is a very entrepreneurial part of the world anyway. You leave London, you come back to Newcastle for personal reasons to be with the kids, and then you're back in the corporate world. it's really difficult to settle back into that. You try and focus on that, but it's not as fast paced. It's not as exciting. It's very mundane. There's structure and there's discipline there, but you don't really know where you're going in the business. So I thought, you know what? I know this sounds random, but I just thought, I don't need this business. I've done this for long enough now. I think I'd been in professional staffing for 10 years. I had a good network of clients, and I'd done well for myself. I had, a decent amount of savings and assets that I knew I could start up Samuel Knight. And I just thought, I'm going to set up. I'm going to do it. I didn't think about it. I didn't overthink it. I came up with the name, spoke to a couple of people in the industry. There's a lot of people in Newcastle that thought I was going to go and work at their businesses. I got approached. We've heard Newcastle's such a small part of the world where everybody knows everything. I hadn't even told anybody anything, and everybody knew I was leaving. And I was like, how is this even possible?
That's right. I don't even know I'm leaving.
Yeah. I'm like, how is this even possible? How do you know? But anyway, so I didn't overthink it. And I just thought, right, let's just do it. Let's go for it. So that's what I did. I resigned from Michael Page, and I set Samuel Knight up, and the rest is history, as they say.
And it's interesting because you sort of said there, Steve, that the time you spent with Paul Beak perhaps gave you insight that you didn't have before. Point is, the veil had been lifted, and for the first time, you actually saw perhaps what was possible.
Yeah.
In terms of setting up and growing a business.
And I learned a lot from Paul. And I'd learned a lot over the 3 years away from Paul that, I was obviously part of the operation board at Michael Page. So I'd started getting that exposure to profit and loss, or balance sheet and things like that. Maybe not so much the financial aspect of it, because obviously I set Samuel Knight up, and within 2 years we nearly went bust because we'd grown too quickly. But I knew if I didn't know something, I would go and learn it, and I would go and understand what I need to do to fix the problem that I've caused. So yeah, every person that I've met on the journey has played a part in my development, in Samuel Knight's growth, in Samuel Knight being a success. Like, I look at Samuel Knight now, and we're coming up to 12 years old, especially when you see businesses in the Northeast. This year alone, I think I've seen 3 recruitment companies go into administration, and I'm probably sure around the UK there's probably a lot more, many more than that. And I always reflect on things. I'm not overly reflect on things, because I don't really want to know what's happened in the past, because it doesn't define your future. But I do reflect on things, and I sit and I think to myself, why is Samuel Knight successful? And why are we on this trajectory of achieving greatness? And hand on heart, it is because of the people in the business that understand their accountabilities and what they need to do in the organization. So I had the idea, and I'm fine with that. I had the idea, I'm the founder, and I get to do all of the town hall speaking, and people want to know Steve's mindset, and I'm classed as the entrepreneur because I took the risk. Yeah. But Samuel Knight is a success because of each and every single director, board member, employee in that organization who pushes that business to be great. And there's probably 2 key people that have really pushed that business. Lisa West, without her, what she's done in that business over 8 years is unbelievable. So she's head of our finance. And Dan Kerr, who has pretty much been with me from day one, he's our COO. Without them 2, this business wouldn't be anywhere near where it is today. Nowhere near. So one person can have the idea, but great minds come together.
It isn't interesting if you sort of try and just reconcile that point to one of the points you made earlier, Steve, which was when you were younger. Yeah. Actually, for Steve, it was all about Steve.
Yep.
You thought single-handedly you could take on the world, and you didn't need people around you to succeed.
Yeah.
How very different now.
Totally different. I mean, Christ, I'm all about my family. My weekends are spent predominantly with my family or my friends, mostly my family. I do, the gym and go out on bike rides and see my friends on a Friday for a couple of hours. But a lot of my time is spent with Amy, spent with Lily, and we do nice things together. So family, really, really important to me. Friends really important to me. My colleagues and my peers at Samuel Knight have been just as important to the success of Samuel Knight as me. Yeah. So the start, different person to the midway point, let's call it. But I think that happens to all of us. If you can't, it's like that old saying, isn't it? Well, there is a saying: if you want to go fast, go alone. Okay. So you've got a period of time at the start of you being, say, 15 or let's say 20, you finish school. Are you really bothered about other people's successes at 20 years old? So you go fast. If you want to go fast, go alone. So you go fast. And then you get to another point where you go, well, if you want to go far, go together. So then you go, okay, I need a group of people now because one person can't create greatness. In certain things, walks of life, maybe. But if you've got a group of people with the same drive, the same motives, and the same aspirations, you can take on anything and nothing can break that. I genuinely believe that you can take on, it doesn't matter what your competition's doing, it doesn't matter what's going on out there. If you all got the same mindset and you know that this is going to be successful, all this noise is, I've got a great ability to not get distracted anyway. But all this noise just goes away and it's just noise outside and you're just focused on yourself. But collectively, there's a team of people working towards greatness and not just one person. That's unbeatable. You can't beat it.
And when you resigned from Michael Page,
yep,
with the ambition to have your own business, but without a clear playbook as to how to build what it was you could perhaps see in your mind, did you then know the people that you would be identifying to bring into the business to help you set it up and scale it, or did you not at that moment?
No. I took three of the staff that worked with me at Michael Page. I got my wrist slapped by Michael Page for doing that, as you would. And at the time, again, I was only 29, 30 years old, and I got a slap wrist, and I obviously got I had to compensate Michael Page for doing that. And at the time, I thought that was quite unfair. But now I understand it. It was just a lesson. It's okay. And it is what it is. But no, I didn't know who was going to be key to the success of Samuel Knight. I didn't have this big audacious plan either. I was very much focused on, okay, what's important? I want to build a business that everybody enjoys working at. Everybody is driving towards being involved in a great company. And if this business gets to 10 staff, in a nice little office in Newcastle, making good money, good margins, and adding value to my clients, that will be a great achievement. And it went far beyond that.
And of course, many of our viewers will know you and Samuel Knight, but for those who don't, in terms of the business now, Steve, could you just give us an insight into its size, in terms of revenue, headcount, and I guess geographical coverage?
So geographical coverage is EMEA regions. We've got head offices in Newcastle. We've got a satellite office in London. We've got our rail infrastructure business in Bristol. And then we work mostly EMEA and rest of world from Newcastle. We've got an office in Dubai, which is run by Lisa West. And that covers everything on the east, all of Europe into APAC regions. And then we launched Samuel Knight Corp, which is our US entity, in 2020. Launched that from Texas, Dallas. And that's our head office in the US, and we've got an office in Boston as well. Size now, full-time employees, about 80 staff. Institutional investment raised in 2019 with Gresham House. This year will probably be the best year we've had since COVID. We're our half year now. We've grown by 120% on last year's revenue. EBIT is in line with budget. We're probably operating this year at about 28 million in sales. Profitable, very profitable. Big growth plans for the second half of this year. A couple of exciting things going on. And the business now is focused across 3 core markets. So you got transportation infrastructure, so rail, electrification on rail infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and digital infrastructure, and that's all we do. And board of directors, it's one of them things, isn't it? When someone says, "Tell us about the business," it's like it's 12 years old now, so it's not a startup anymore. It's like it's like a young child now. It's gone from being a baby to like being a teenager now. So it's still it's still a bit like, it's still a little bit like a Ferrari. It's really, really fast, and sometimes you can't control the damn thing, but that's okay. You just enjoy the ride a little bit. That's how I look at it. And, you know, in 10 years' time, where's it going to be? I think it could be an amazing company. It's an amazing company now, but I think it could be 3, 4, 5 times bigger than what it is now. Who knows? As I said before, the one thing I've learned as I've got a bit grayer and a bit older is, and a bit maturer, is that you can't control everything. Who knows what's going to happen in the economy to allow Samuel Knight to be successful? It's not that we don't have the desire, the motivation, and the ability to be successful. What we do have is I have a natural ability to guide us out of storms as best I can with my senior management team. But we can't control everything. So we can only control the controllables. Anything that's not controllable, just ride it, just go with it. So we've got the right foundations. We've got the right management team. We've got the right people. We've got the right strategy. We've got the right brand. We've got everything that will allow Samuel Knight to be successful is now there. But there's still things that could hurt us. So who knows?
I've got 2 final questions.
Hit me.
I guess my penultimate question for today's podcast, Steve, is throughout your life and your career, both as an employee and as an entrepreneur, you've always been clearly very focused and you've wanted to achieve a lot within a short time frame.
Yep.
That's quite clear. And maybe ADHD has something to do with that, but actually maybe it's just due to the fact that you were born to strive.
Yep.
What now keeps you interested? Because of course, an entrepreneur, certainly someone who has the traits you've described you have, likes to be involved in lots of things, likes to be excited by innovation, but doesn't want to be turning a handle. And of course, when you've got a bigger business, you've got a board and you've got structure, you've got teams, actually, perhaps you're no longer doing some of the things you used to love, i.e., out with prospects or taking a client for a bit. So how do you keep interested?
I still add value to the business. And because I add value and because we are innovative and we still think of new ways to scale and grow the business, that keeps me interested. So it was, obviously, I went and did a master's because I had the ability in my mind to free up some of my time in Samuel Knight. And it was at that point where it was being operational. There was challenges, and my job as the CEO was to get us out of them challenges with my team. And then we launched Samuel Knight data centers in February. And that for me relit a fire because it's like, okay, so it's something new. This is where, I excel because it's something new. I've got to create a strategy. I've got to work with this individual, Sam Forrest, who came to me with the idea, jump on plane, go to Austin, develop this strategy, develop a trading operating model, open up prospects, talk to clients and really try and get my head around what's actually happening in the data center market. Why is it such a high growth industry? So I love researching and I love reading. And then when you start looking at it and you say, oh my God, there's nearly $1 trillion going to get invested in this market in the next 12 months. That for me is, wow, I can be an entrepreneur again. And I love being an entrepreneur. I love seeing opportunities and I love creating something. And that is engaging me back. And the same with the challenges on the renewables industry. There's a lot of challenges where 2 years ago, David Attenborough came out and said, by 2050, everybody in the West should be either carbon neutral or carbon free. And they created the Paris Agreement alongside, obviously, the other westernized countries that created it. And that for me was driving that kind of fast-paced market to be involved in. And I think people's desires on the renewables industry is changing somewhat because of what's happening mostly over the Atlantic.
That's right. With
conventional power now being more, possibly being more attractive to how to, power westernized countries. So that to me that gives us another challenge there as well, because I don't believe that. I believe that renewables is the way forward and one person can't dictate that should change. And it is clear that the CO2 emissions are harming the environment. And, if you're a fan of history, you can look back from the Industrial Revolution to now and what's going to happen from now until another 100 years. You've got
clear.
Yeah, you've got children. your children's children will feel the impact of what we do in society today. So that means my children's children will feel that as well. So that they're close to me because they're my grandchildren. So I still believe in that. So for me, I'm a big advocate, and I'm a big and I will speak my mind on and be transparent about why I think renewables is the way forward. And I think that's a challenge. So that keeps me engaged as well. And I always said my engagement with Samuel Knight I would move into a chairman role or whatever the team wanted me to at the point that I stop adding value to the business. And I don't think that's the point yet. And I love being in the company. I love my team. I like working in the business. I see what we've got. And I don't think, even doing 30 million this year, I don't think we're anywhere near where we can get this business.
No. Well, as you say, the size of the addressable market is still great. It's
huge.
And whilst you've built a brilliant business to this point, as you said, there's so much more.
We're not even touching 0.5% of the market.
Right.
And it needs, and when you go through team dynamics, and I'm sure you've done this as you've built Rycroft, you go into this forming stage, and that's when the team forms together. Then you go through storming, and that's when you start challenging each other for greatness. It's like, if you want the same as me, you should have the same mindset as me. And then you go into this kind of mindset where it goes forming, storming, norming. So it becomes the norm of success. If this is our drives, these are our motives, we're all rowing towards the same goal. Everybody knows what we're rowing towards. And then all of a sudden you hit this performing stage.
Yes.
And this is like Liverpool next year. Okay. Anyone who's a Liverpool fan, they will be getting excited because it's like they've gone through greatness and they've still got that because they've got that performing attitude and they've got that performing mindset. And I know it's football, but you can look at business the same as football. If you hit a team that fully is at performing level and you can do what you've done at forming, norming stage, imagine what you can achieve at performing stage on another level. So that is why I'm still engaged in the business. But, do I want to be doing this in another 10, 15 years? I don't know.
I think that's a different podcast, Steve. My final question for today is obviously where you are now is very different to where you were 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. Not only in terms of attitude, mindset, and what motivated you, but of course, what you've achieved.
Yeah.
So if you could now sit down with 16-year-old Steve, who was a bit of a rebel, didn't see the value in education, clearly, was a bit of a free spirit, perhaps. What would you say to him? Because, of course, a lot of people on this podcast either will have children who perhaps don't conform, or they themselves might be younger people going through education, perhaps not doing as well as they think they could do for one reason or another. What advice would you give your younger self, given what you now know that you didn't know then?
It's a really good question. I would probably say take every opportunity that's presented to you. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Go through life with that joyous, positive attitude that you've got, and everything will be fine. I wouldn't change that 16-year-old Steve. There's nothing I would change about him. And I'm sure there's people out there that think, mate, you sound like an absolute knacker when you were 16. But what I did, the way I was as a teenager is who I am today. So the advice I would give him is just go and do whatever you want to do and focus on the things that you think are important to you now. And you will get to a point where you'll achieve whatever you want to achieve in life. That's what I would say.
Steve, massive thanks. It's been genuinely an absolute pleasure to have you on this podcast. I'm confident our viewers will take so much away. And I think what you've demonstrated to me is that overnight successes don't exist.
Yep.
I think being a black sheep or being focused or being very clear about what you're trying to achieve is something that should be encouraged rather than discouraged. And for sure, you've definitely taught me that at times of difficulty and hardship, and perhaps your two children are the two best placed people to fully understand what I'm about to say, you've got an option. And you can either be the victim, or you can, of course, grieve and perhaps acknowledge that life is unfair, because sometimes it is. But you can then choose a positive way forward. So thank you, Steve, for sharing your inspiring story. It's been brilliant to spend some time with you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have Steve Rawlinson on our Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcast this afternoon. It was brilliant to go back to the beginning to understand a bit more about Steve as a young teenager who perhaps wasn't conforming as a consequence of having ADHD, his absolute reluctance to perhaps stick in at school, which of course resulted in Steve falling out of school without any GCSEs. He talked a lot about his travel, and whilst perhaps his travels didn't give him better academia, nor perhaps give him any obvious playbook to success, what it did give Steve is the opportunity to travel the world, meet people, perhaps become far more amenable to understanding that perhaps the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. Of course, Steve, when travelling in Ibiza, met his late partner, who sadly passed away at a very young age, leaving Steve with his two children. Of course, whilst that hardship perhaps for many would have been enough to break them, Steve's resilience, very broad shoulders, and absolute zest for life is what encouraged Steve to dig deep for the benefit of himself and his children. And of course, perhaps that mindset which you choose is this thing that without doubt has resulted in Steve being able to use that challenging time positively. Of course, Steve then spent most of his early career going through recruitment businesses, climbing the corporate ladder, leaving Michael Page to set up his most recent business, Samuel Knight. Samuel Knight now is an international recruitment business. It secured private equity investment from Gresham House Ventures in 2020. And of course, Steve to this day is a very proud founder and CEO of the business. For me, the podcast told me a lot about Steve's absolute commitment to greatness. Steve, as a young child, was a black sheep, and actually perhaps standing out of a crowd for all of the right reasons, albeit perhaps the perception is being a black sheep is a negative rather than a positive. Steve talked about during our podcast his selfishness in his early years, but for me, it wasn't selfish. It was an absolute commitment to greatness and willing to do most of the things that most people don't do in pursuit of achievement. Of course, when Steve lost his previous partner, clearly it is devastating. But as I said just earlier, I think the thing that inspired me most about Steve is his reflective nature and absolute keenness to always see positive in every set of circumstances, bearing in mind at the face of adversity is often when the greatest opportunities present themselves, if you are willing to see that. Finally, without doubt, Steve now sees that to build a great business, you have to build a business through people. Single-handedly, no one achieves greatness. And I think Steve's absolute focus now on always wanting to work with a collection of people to achieve greatness and to in turn help them achieve greatness individually is perhaps the thing that Steve takes most pride in today. It has been a pleasure spending time with Steve Rawlinson, and I look forward to seeing him and his group continue to succeed over the years to come. But for now, you have been watching Confessions of an Entrepreneur, powered by RG. If you would like to download any other podcast in this Confessions of a series, then you can either watch our Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcast via YouTube, or indeed you can download podcasts from wherever you download your podcasts. But for now, thank you to our viewers for joining us. I hope that you really enjoy this podcast, and we look forward to welcoming you to future Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcasts.